The cold winter wind cut through David's thin jacket like a knife. He pulled the worn blanket tighter around his shoulders and checked his watch. 11:30 p.m. The highway overpass above him provided some shelter from the snow, but nothing could keep out the bitter cold that seemed to freeze his bones. 3 months ago, David never imagined he'd be calling a piece of cardboard his home. He had been a construction foreman for 12 years, proud of the houses and buildings his crew had built across the city. His small apartment wasn't much, but it was his. He had his truck, his tools, and enough money in the bank to feel secure. Then everything changed in one terrible moment. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning while his crew was working on a high-rise downtown. A steel beam broke loose from the crane, and David pushed 2 of his younger workers out of the way. The beam crushed his left leg and damaged his spine. The doctor said he was lucky to be alive, but David didn't feel very lucky lying in that hospital bed for 6 weeks. The workers' compensation barely covered his medical bills. When he couldn't return to work after 3 months, his boss had to let him go. Construction was a tough business, and injured workers couldn't stay on the payroll forever. David understood, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Without steady income, the bills piled up fast. First went the truck payments, then the rent. His savings disappeared into medical debt and basic living expenses. When the eviction notice came, David packed what little he could carry in an old military duffel bag. The rest of his belongings, furniture, photos, memories of a different life, stayed behind. Now he sat under this bridge, listening to cars rumble overhead and trying to stay warm. His legs still ached when the weather turned cold, a constant reminder of how quickly life could change. But David refused to let his situation break his spirit. Every morning, he walked 3 miles to the public library where he could clean up in the bathroom and use the computers to look for work. The librarians pretended not to notice when he spent hours there warming up and reading newspapers. Mrs. Chun, the head librarian, sometimes left sandwiches near the computer station. She never said they were for him, but David knew. His military training from 20 years ago helped him survive on the streets. The Army had taught him discipline, how to make the best of bad situations, and most importantly, how to help others, even when you had nothing yourself. Under this same bridge lived 5 other people who had nowhere else to go. There was Tommy, a Vietnam veteran whose mind sometimes took him back to the jungle. David made sure Tommy took his medication and ate regular meals. Betty was a grandmother who lost her house when her son stole her savings for drugs. David helped her apply for social services and walked with her to appointments because she was afraid to go alone. Then there was Carlos, the barely 18 who aged out of foster care with no family and no job skills. David was teaching him basic construction work, showing him how to measure wood and use tools properly. "Everyone deserves a chance," David would tell Carlos. "Your situation today doesn't define your future." The youngest member of their small community was 16-year-old Ashley, who ran away from an abusive home. David made sure she stayed in school, walking her to the bus stop every morning and helping with homework in the evenings. He convinced her to call her aunt in another state, and they were working on getting Ashley safely to her relative's house. People walking by often ignored the homeless camp under the bridge. Some crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Others threw spare change or leftover food without stopping to talk. But David saw each act of kindness, no matter how small, and made sure it reached someone who needed it most. He organized their small group like a military unit. Everyone had responsibilities, keeping the area clean, watching out for each other, sharing resources. David established rules: no drugs or alcohol in their camp, no fighting, and everyone who could work had to look for jobs during the day. Despite having so little, David's reputation spread among the homeless community. Other camps knew they could come to him for help settling disputes or advice about navigating city services. Social workers began seeking him out, knowing he could connect them with people who needed assistance but were afraid to ask for it. The local police officers got to know David too. Officer Rodriguez often stopped by during evening patrols. Not to cause trouble, but to check if anyone needed medical attention or had information about crimes in the area. David's military background and natural leadership had earned respect even from law enforcement. "You're different from most folks out here," Officer Rodriguez told him one night. "You could probably find a way off the streets if you really focused on just yourself." David adjusted his blanket and looked around at his small community. "These people are my responsibility now," he replied. "I can't just leave them behind." That attitude defined everything David did. When the city shelter served expired food, David organized a complaint that got the issue fixed. When drug dealers tried to recruit Carlos, David confronted them and made it clear the boy was under his protection. When Betty got sick with pneumonia, David sat with her in the emergency room for 14 hours to make sure she received proper care. His own needs always came last. David's jacket had holes in 3 places, but he gave his better coat to Tommy when winter got worse. His boots were falling apart, but he used his last $20 to buy Ashley warm socks and gloves for school. When he found part-time work, helping clean up construction sites, David spent most of his earnings on food for the group. Some nights, lying on his cardboard mat with his duffel bag as a pillow, David wondered if he was doing the right thing. Maybe he should focus on getting himself back on his feet first. Maybe trying to help everyone else was keeping him trapped in this situation, but then he'd look around at Tommy sleeping peacefully instead of having nightmares, or see Carlos practicing measurements with a broken tape measure, or watch Ashley doing homework under a streetlight. These people had become his family. They depended on him, and he couldn't let them down. The wind picked up again, rattling the plastic sheets they used to block the worst drafts. David checked on each person in their small camp, making sure everyone was warm enough and safe. Tomorrow would bring another day of job searching, helping his friends navigate their challenges, and trying to survive with dignity in a world that often forgot people like them existed. As he finally settled down to sleep, David whispered a prayer of gratitude. Despite everything he'd lost, he still had his health, his principles, and people who counted on him. He was still a good man trying to do right in difficult circumstances. He had no idea that tomorrow night everything would change again, but this time change would come from an act of courage that would touch hundreds of lives and prove that heroes can emerge from the most unexpected places. Tuesday night started like any other for David. He had just finished helping Ashley with her math homework under the streetlight when the temperature dropped even more. The weather forecast called for snow, and he wanted to make sure everyone in their small camp had enough blankets and warm clothes for the night. Tommy was having one of his good days, talking clearly about his plans to visit the VA office in the morning. Carlos had landed a 2-day job helping move furniture, which meant a little extra money for food. Betty was feeling better after her bout with pneumonia, though she still coughed sometimes. Everyone seemed settled for the night. David decided to take a walk to the nearby truck stop. The place stayed open 24 hours, and sometimes the night manager would let him buy coffee with his spare change. The warmth inside would help him get feeling back in his fingers and toes before trying to sleep. The truck stop sat about half a mile from their bridge, next to the highway where big rigs pulled in to refuel and drivers grabbed food for long hauls. David had gotten to know some of the regular truckers over the past few months. They were good people, mostly, who understood what it meant to be far from home and struggling. As he walked the familiar path, David heard something that made him stop. Angry voices carried on the cold night air, coming from behind the truck stop near the dumpsters. At first he thought it might be truckers arguing about parking spaces or someone complaining about the food, but something in the tone made his military instincts kick in. David moved closer, staying in the shadows. His years in the army had taught him to assess situations before acting. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 men had cornered someone near the back of the building. The victim was on the ground, and the attackers were kicking him while going through his pockets. Even in the dim light from the truck stop's back door, David could see this wasn't just a robbery. This was brutal. The man on the ground wore a leather jacket with patches that David recognized. He'd seen enough motorcycles around the city, too. No, this was a biker, probably from one of the local clubs. The three attackers looked young, maybe early 20s, and they were enjoying their work too much. "Where's the rest of your money, old man?" one of them demanded, rifling through a leather wallet. "Bikers are supposed to be tough. You don't look so tough now." The biker tried to get up, but another attacker kicked him in the ribs. The sound made David wince. He'd heard bones break before, and that kick might have cracked something important. David's first instinct was to call the police, but he didn't have a phone. Even if he did, by the time cops arrived, this man might be dead. The attackers were getting more violent, not less. One of them picked up a broken bottle from the ground. For a moment, David hesitated. Getting involved meant risking his own life. These men were younger and stronger than him, and they clearly had no problem with violence. If something happened to David, who would take care of Tommy, Betty, Carlos, and Ashley? They depended on him, but then the biker looked up, and David saw his face clearly for the first time. Blood ran from a cut above his eye, and his expression showed something David recognized from his own worst moments. The look of a man who thought his time was up. The decision made itself. David couldn't walk away from someone who needed help, no matter the cost. It went against everything he believed about being a decent human being. David looked around for anything he could use to even the odds. Near the dumpster he spotted a metal pipe, probably left over from some construction work. It wasn't much, but it was better than facing three armed men with just his fists. He picked up the pipe and stepped out of the shadows. "Hey!" he called out, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Leave him alone." The three attackers turned toward David, and he got his first good look at them. They were definitely young, probably kids from the rough part of town looking for easy money. Their leader, a tall guy with a shaved head, laughed when he saw David. "Look what we got here," the leader said. "Another hero. You picked the wrong night to play tough guy, homeless man." David realized his appearance worked against him. His worn clothes and thin frame didn't exactly scream dangerous opponent, but that might actually be an advantage. These kids were overconfident. "I'm not looking for trouble," David said, gripping the pipe tighter. "Just walk away and nobody else gets hurt." The second attacker, shorter but stockier than his friend, pulled out a knife. "You're gonna regret sticking your nose where it don't belong." David's military training kicked in fully. He assessed the situation like a combat scenario. Three opponents, one armed with a knife, one holding the broken bottle, one empty-handed but probably the strongest. The injured biker couldn't help much, but he might be able to move if given a chance. The truck stop's back door was propped open, which meant witnesses might hear if things got loud. The lighting was poor, which could work for or against him. Most importantly, David had the element of surprise. These kids expected easy victims, not someone willing to fight back. "Last chance," David warned. "Walk away now." Instead of listening, the leader rushed forward with the broken bottle. David sidestepped and brought the pipe down on the attacker's wrist. The bottle shattered on the concrete, and the young man screamed in pain. The stocky one with the knife came next, but David was ready. Years of dealing with dangerous situations on construction sites had kept his reflexes sharp. He dodged the knife thrust and caught the attacker in the stomach with the pipe's end. The kid doubled over, gasping for air. The third attacker, seeing his friends down, grabbed what he could from the biker's scattered belongings and ran. His friends limped after him, the leader holding his injured wrist and cursing loudly. Within seconds, all three had disappeared into the darkness between the parked trucks. David dropped the pipe and knelt beside the injured biker. The man was conscious but hurt bad. Blood covered his face from multiple cuts, and he held his ribs like they might be broken. "You okay?" David asked, knowing it was a stupid question but not sure what else to say. The biker looked up at David with confusion, and something that might have been respect. "Why'd you help me? You don't even know me." David helped him sit up against the dumpster. "Didn't need to know you. Just needed to know you were in trouble." As David helped check the man's injuries and gather his scattered belongings, he had no idea this moment would change both their lives forever. Sometimes the most important decisions we make happen in just a few seconds, When we choose to do what's right instead of what's safe. The biker sat against the dumpster, breathing heavily and wincing every time he moved. David could see the man was trying to act tough, but the pain was written all over his face. Blood dripped from a cut above his left eye, and the way he held his side suggested those kicks had done real damage. "Can you stand?" David asked, extending his hand to help. The biker looked at David's outstretched hand for a long moment, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "Yeah, I think so," he said finally. Accepting the help, David pulled him to his feet, moving slowly to avoid causing more pain. The man was bigger than David had realized, probably 6 feet tall and built like someone who worked with his hands. His leather jacket was scuffed and torn from the attack, but David could see the patches more clearly now. The main patch on the back read, "Thunder," above a lightning bolt design. "Thunder?" David asked, nodding toward the jacket. "Road name?" the biker explained, leaning against the wall to steady himself. "Real name's Jake Morrison. Been riding for 22 years, never had anything like this happen." David began gathering Jake's scattered belongings from the ground. His wallet had been torn apart, credit cards and papers scattered everywhere. A set of motorcycle keys lay near a puddle, and David carefully picked them up and wiped them clean. "They get anything important?" David asked, handing Jake his wallet. Jake checked through his things, counting what was left. Took about $200 in cash, but they missed the credit cards. "Probably too panicked to think straight after you showed up." He looked at David with curiosity. "What's your name?" "David," he replied, helping gather the last of the scattered papers. "David Wilson." "Well, David Wilson, you just saved my life. Those punks weren't planning to leave me breathing." David found Jake's motorcycle parked near the front of the truck. "Stop." It was a massive Harley-Davidson, black with chrome details that caught the light from the building's neon sign. Even David, who knew nothing about motorcycles, could tell this was an expensive machine. "Beautiful bike," David said as they walked slowly toward it. Jake managed a small smile despite his injuries. 1998 Heritage Softail. Rebuilt the engine myself 3 times. She's been with me longer than most people in my life. As they reached the motorcycle, David noticed Jake was having trouble moving his left arm. The way he favored it suggested the attackers had done more damage than just bruises and cuts. "You need to get to a hospital," David said. "That arm looks bad, and you might have broken ribs." Jake shook his head stubbornly. "I've had worse. Just need to clean up and get home." David pulled off his own shirt, leaving him in just a thin undershirt in the cold night air. The shirt was old and had holes, but it was clean. He handed it to Jake. "What's this for?" Jake asked. "That cut above your eye is still bleeding pretty bad. Press this against it to stop the bleeding." Jake took the shirt, looking at David like he was seeing him for the first time. "You're giving me the shirt off your back? Literally?" David shrugged. "You need it more than I do right now." As Jake pressed the makeshift bandage against his head wound, David noticed something that made his stomach turn. The cut was deeper than he'd thought, probably needing stitches. Jake's left hand was also swelling up, and there were marks on his neck that suggested the attackers had tried to choke him at some point. "Those weren't just random muggers," David said. "They knew you'd have money. They were waiting for you." Jake nodded grimly. "Been thinking the same thing. I eat at that diner every Tuesday night after our club meeting. Same time, same routine. Someone's been watching." David helped Jake check his motorcycle for damage. The attackers had knocked it over during the struggle, but it didn't look like anything was broken. The engine started on the first try, rumbling with the deep sound that made Harley-Davidsons famous. "You sure you can ride that thing?" David asked. "Your left arm doesn't look right." "I can manage," Jake said, though his voice wasn't very convincing. "Look, David, I owe you big time. Let me give you something for helping out." Jake reached for his wallet, but David held up a hand to stop him. "Don't need anything," David said. "Just glad you're okay. Come on, man. You risked your life for a stranger? That's worth something." David looked at Jake seriously. "If you really want to pay me back, just help someone else when you get the chance. Keep it moving forward." Jake stared at David for a long moment, clearly not used to people turning down money. "Where are you headed now? Can I give you a ride somewhere?" "Thanks, but I live pretty close by. Walking's good for me." "Live close by?" Jake looked around at the industrial area surrounding the truck stop. "There's nothing but warehouses and the highway around here." David pointed toward the overpass. "Visible in the distance, under the bridge. It's not much, but it's home." The expression on Jake's face changed completely. David could see the pieces falling into place, the worn clothes, the willingness to fight for a stranger, the refusal to take money. "You're homeless," Jake said, not as a question but as a statement. "For now," David replied. "Things change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Right now, I'm just taking it one day at a time." Jake was quiet for several minutes, still holding David's shirt against his head wound. The bleeding had mostly stopped, but the fabric was stained red. "I don't understand you," Jake said finally. "You got nothing, living under a bridge, and you risked everything to help me. Most people with houses and jobs wouldn't have done what you did." David smiled. "Most people are good people. They just sometimes need someone to show them how." "Not where I come from," Jake said. "In my world, you look out for your own first. Everyone else is just competition or a threat." "Maybe that's why." "You needed help tonight," David suggested gently. "Sometimes the people we least expect turn out to be the ones we can count on." Jake mounted his motorcycle, moving carefully to avoid aggravating his injuries. He looked down at David standing beside the bike. "This doesn't feel right, me riding away while you walk back to a bridge in this cold." "I'll be fine," David assured him. "Got friends waiting for me. We take care of each other." "Friends under the bridge?" "Best family I've ever had," David said. And Jake could hear he meant it. Jake started the engine and put the bike in gear, but he didn't pull away immediately. "David Wilson," he said over the rumble of the motor. "I won't forget what you did tonight, and I always pay my debts." David stepped back as Jake pulled out of the parking lot. He watched the motorcycle's taillights disappear into the darkness, then began the walk back to his community under the bridge. The cold bit through his thin undershirt, but David felt warm inside. He had no idea that Jake Morrison was the road captain of the largest motorcycle club in 3 states, or that the story of tonight's rescue would spread through the biker community like wildfire. All David knew was that he'd helped someone who needed it, and that felt right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight he'd made a difference in someone's life. For David, that was enough. Jake rode slowly through the empty streets, his Harley's engine echoing off the dark buildings. Every bump in the road sent sharp pain through his ribs, and his left arm throbbed with each heartbeat. But the physical pain wasn't what bothered him most. What kept running through his mind was the homeless man who had saved his life. In Jake's world, people didn't help strangers without wanting something in return. 22 years in the motorcycle club had taught him that everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted to use you for something. But David Wilson had risked his life and asked for nothing. Not money, not favors, not even recognition. That kind of behavior didn't make sense to Jake. He pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex, a decent place in a working-class neighborhood. Jake had bought the 2-bedroom unit 5 years ago when his contracting business started doing well. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. The motorcycle club respected members who could stand on their own feet. Inside his apartment, Jake looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding, but it would definitely scar. His left cheekbone was swollen and turning purple. Worst of all, his left shoulder felt like it was on fire every time he moved it. He carefully removed David's shirt from his head wound. The old fabric was stained with blood, but Jake found himself reluctant to throw it away. This shirt represented something he couldn't quite understand yet. Jake had been suspicious of David at first. In his experience, homeless people were either mentally ill, drug addicts, or con artists looking for their next score. He'd learned to avoid them, to see them as problems rather than people. But David was different from every homeless person Jake had ever encountered. The man spoke clearly and intelligently. His eyes were sharp and focused, not the vacant stare Jake associated with drug users. Most importantly, David had shown genuine courage and skill during the fight. Those weren't random swings with a pipe. That was someone who knew how to handle himself in dangerous situations. Jake opened a beer and sat in his recliner, trying to piece together what he knew about David Wilson. The man was clearly educated and well-spoken. His movements during the fight suggested military training. But somehow, he'd ended up living under a bridge, wearing clothes with holes and giving away his shirt to help a stranger. The more Jake thought about it, the more ashamed he felt about his initial assumptions. He'd judged David based on his appearance and living situation, never considering that there might be a real person with a real story behind the homeless label. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his club president, asking about the Tuesday night meeting and whether everything was okay. Jake realized he'd never made it home from the diner, and his brothers were probably worried. But he wasn't ready to tell the whole story yet. Not until he understood it better himself. The next morning, Jake woke up feeling even worse than the night before. His ribs screamed when he tried to get out of bed, and his left arm was so swollen he could barely move it. Looking in the mirror, he saw that the bruising had spread across half his face. He called his business partner to cancel their morning job and drove to the emergency room. The doctor confirmed what Jake already suspected: 3 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder that had somehow popped back into place during the night. The cut above his eye needed 12 stitches. "You were in a fight?" the doctor asked while cleaning the wound. "Something like that," Jake replied, not wanting to get into details. "Well, whoever helped you probably saved your life? These injuries could have been much worse if the attack had continued." Jake thought about David's quick action and willingness to get involved. Yeah, I guess they did. After leaving the hospital, Jake found himself driving back toward the truck stop. He told himself he was just checking to make sure there were no witnesses or evidence from the night before, but deep down he knew that wasn't true. He wanted to see David again. The truck stop looked different in daylight. Just a normal business serving highway travelers and local workers. Jake parked and walked around to the back where the attack had happened. Someone had cleaned up the area, and there was no sign of the previous night's violence. Jake drove toward the overpass where David had said he lived. As he got closer, he could see tarps and cardboard structures tucked back in the shadows under the bridge. It looked like several people had made temporary homes in the space. He parked his motorcycle and walked toward the small camp. As he got closer, Jake could hear voices, people talking and even laughing. It wasn't what he'd expected. This place felt more like a community than the dangerous homeless camp he'd imagined. David appeared from behind one of the larger cardboard structures, carrying a plastic container of water. He stopped when he saw Jake approaching, clearly surprised. "Jake, what are you doing here?" David asked, setting down the water container. "Came to check on you," Jake said, though he wasn't sure that was entirely true. "Wanted to make sure you got home okay last night?" David smiled. "This is home." "And yeah, I made it back fine. How are you feeling?" "You look like you got hit by a truck." Jake touched the bandage above his eye. "Doctor says 3 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder. Could have been worse." "Much worse," David agreed. "Those guys weren't planning to leave you breathing." Other people began emerging from the camp, curious about the visitor. Jake saw an older man who moved like a veteran, a grandmother-type woman, a young Hispanic guy, and a teenage girl who should have been in school. "Everyone, this is Jake," David said. "Jake, these are my friends, Tommy, Betty, Carlos, and Ashley." Jake nodded awkwardly, not sure how to interact with homeless people who weren't asking him for money or trying to scam him. These people looked at him with friendly curiosity, not the desperate hunger he'd expected. "You're the biker David helped last night?" Betty asked. "Honey, you look terrible. Are you sure you should be riding that motorcycle?" Jake was taken aback by the genuine concern in her voice. "I'm okay. Just wanted to thank David again." "No need for thanks," David said. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Jake said firmly. "Anyone wouldn't have. Most people would have walked away." Tommy, the older veteran, studied Jake with Sharp eyes. You military? He asked. No, but I can tell you are, Jake replied. Both of you. Army? 20 years, David said. Tommy here did 2 tours in Vietnam. Jake felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. David's fighting skills and leadership qualities made more sense now. But it also raised new questions. About how a military veteran had ended up homeless. What happened? Jake asked, then immediately regretted being so direct. Sorry, that's none of my business. Construction accident, David said simply. Lost my job? Couldn't pay the bills? Ended up here. Nothing dramatic, just life happening. Jake looked around the camp again, seeing it with new eyes. These weren't dangerous criminals or lazy people looking for handouts. They were individuals who had fallen on hard times, creating a family unit to help each other survive. You take care of all these people? Jake asked David. We take care of each other, David corrected. Everyone contributes what they can. As Jake spent more time talking with David and his friends, he realized how wrong his assumptions had been about homeless people. These were good people facing difficult circumstances, not so different from challenges Jake had faced in his own life. For the first time in years, Jake found himself questioning beliefs he'd held without ever really examining them. David Wilson was changing the way he saw the world, one conversation at a time. Jake spent the next hour talking with David and his friends under the bridge. What started as a simple thank you visit turned into something that shook Jake to his core. Everything he thought he knew about homeless people was wrong, Tommy shared. Stories about his military service and how PTSD had cost him his family and job. His eyes were clear and intelligent as he talked about his struggles with nightmares and flashbacks. Betty explained how her son's drug addiction had led to him stealing her life savings. Leaving her with nothing at age 68, Carlos spoke. About aging out of foster care with no family support or job skills. Most surprising was Ashley, the teenager who should have been in school. She was articulate and bright, doing homework even while living under a bridge. When Jake asked why she wasn't in a shelter or with social services, David quietly explained that she'd run away from an abusive situation and was terrified of being sent back. We're working on getting her to her aunt in Oregon, David said. But these things take time, and she needs to feel safe while we figure it out. Jake watched David interact with each person in the camp. He wasn't just their leader, he was their protector, counselor, and friend all rolled into one. When Betty started coughing, David immediately got her more blankets and made sure she had medicine. When Carlos mentioned being nervous about his new job, David spent time coaching him on what to expect. You do this every day? Jake asked David during a quiet moment. Do what? Take care of everyone. Solve their problems. Put their needs before your own, David shrugged. We're family. That's what family does. Jake thought about his own motorcycle club, where brotherhood meant loyalty in fights and backing each other up in business deals. But he'd never seen anything like the gentle, constant care David showed these people. It was a different kind of strength than Jake was used to. As the afternoon wore on, Jake found himself helping with small tasks around the camp. He held a tarp while Carlos secured it against the wind. He listened to Betty talk about her grandchildren, whom she hadn't seen since losing her house. He even helped Ashley with a math problem, surprised by how smart she was, but it was David who fascinated Jake the most. Here was a man who had lost everything, his career, his home, his financial security, yet he seemed more content and purposeful than most people Jake knew who had everything. David's circumstances were terrible, but his spirit was unbroken. Can I ask you something? Jake said when he and David were alone for a moment. Sure. Don't you get angry about how things turned out? About being here instead of having your own place? David considered the question carefully. I used to be angry, real angry. Felt sorry for myself, blamed everyone else for my problems. But anger's just poison you drink hoping someone else gets sick. Doesn't change anything except make you miserable. So you just accepted it? I accepted that bad things happen to good people sometimes. That doesn't mean I gave up fighting to make things better. It just means I stopped wasting energy on things I can't control. Jake had never heard anyone talk about hardship that way. In his world, setbacks were met with anger and revenge. Someone wronged you, you hit back twice as hard. Someone got something you wanted, you took it away from them. But David's approach was completely different. The accident that cost me my job, David continued, I could spend every day bitter about how unfair it was. Or I could focus on what I still have, my health, my mind, people who need me. Which one's going to make my life better? But you're homeless, Jake said, living under a bridge. How is that better? David gestured toward his friends. 6 months ago, Tommy was drinking himself to death and having violent episodes. Now he's sober and getting help from the VA. Betty was sleeping in doorways, scared and alone. Now she's got people who care about her. Carlos was headed for jail or worse. Now he's learning skills and staying out of trouble. And Ashley was living on the streets, vulnerable to all kinds of danger. Now she's safe, in school, and we're working on getting her to family who love her. Jake looked around the camp with new eyes. You saved all of them. They saved me too, David sighed. Gave me purpose when I thought my life was over. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing you ever do. Jake felt something shifting inside his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. He'd been part of a motorcycle club for over 20 years, but he'd never experienced the kind of genuine care and community he saw under this bridge. His brothers would die for him in a fight, but would they sit with him through a panic attack like David did with Tommy? Would they help him with homework like David did with Ashley? I need to tell you something, Jake said suddenly. David waited. Quietly, I'm not just some guy who rides a motorcycle. I'm road captain for the Steel Devils. We're the biggest club in 3 states, over 400 members. David nodded, but didn't seem impressed or intimidated. That's a lot of responsibility. You don't understand. In my world, what you did last night, saving my life, that's a debt that has to be paid. We don't let things like that slide. I told you I don't want anything. And that's exactly why this is so important, Jake said, his voice growing more intense. You risked everything for a stranger and asked for nothing. That kind of honor is rare anywhere, but it's almost impossible to find these days. Jake stood up and began pacing, his excitement building despite the pain in his ribs. I've been thinking about this all day. About you, about this place, about everything you're doing here. And I keep coming back to the same thing. What's that? You saved my life, but you're still here. Still living under a bridge, still struggling to help people with nothing. That's not right. That's not how this story should end. David smiled gently. Jake, you don't owe me anything. What I did wasn't about keeping score or earning rewards. It was just the right thing to do. Maybe for you, Jake said, but not for me. In my club, we have a saying, blood for blood, life for life. You gave me my life back. Now I need to give you yours. I have my life, David protested. Maybe it's not the life you choose, but it's mine, and I'm doing something meaningful with it. Jake stopped pacing and looked directly at David. What if I told you that you could keep doing meaningful things, but do them from a real house, instead of a cardboard box? What if you could help even more people with resources instead of just good intentions? What are you talking about? Jake's voice grew quiet but determined. I'm talking about changing everything. For you, for your friends here, for everyone. I'm talking about the Steel Devils paying a debt in a way that'll blow your mind. David studied Jake's face, seeing something there that hadn't been present before. This wasn't just gratitude talking. This was a man who'd found a mission. Jake, whatever you're thinking, you don't have to. Yes, I do, Jake interrupted. Because yesterday I thought I knew what honor looked like. I thought I understood what it meant to be a brother, to have family. But you showed me something bigger than anything I've ever seen. Jake looked around the camp one more time, then back at David. Give me 24 hours. Just 24 hours. And I promise you, everything changes. As Jake walked back to his motorcycle, David had no idea that his simple act of kindness had set in motion something that would impact hundreds of lives. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest waves. Jake rode his Harley through the city with his mind racing faster than his engine. Every red light gave him time to think about what he'd witnessed under that bridge. Every mile brought him closer to the Steel Devils clubhouse, where he'd have to find the right words to explain something that seemed impossible. The clubhouse sat on the outskirts of town, a large warehouse building that the club had bought and converted 15 years ago. From the outside, it looked like any other industrial building. Inside, it was the heart of a brotherhood that stretched across 3 states and included over 400 members. Jake pulled into the parking lot, where a dozen motorcycles were already lined up in perfect formation. Wednesday afternoons usually brought together the club's leadership team to discuss business, plan events, and handle any problems that needed attention. Today, Jake had a story that would challenge everything these men believed about honor, loyalty, and what it meant to be family. President Ray "Bulldog" Patterson was holding court at the main table when Jake walked in. Bulldog had been leading the Steel Devils for 12 years, building them from a small local club into one of the most respected organizations in the region. He was a fair leader, but demanded respect and expected his road captains to handle their responsibilities without drama. "Thunder," Bulldog called out when he saw Jake. "Where the hell were you last night? When you didn't show up after the meeting, we started thinking something happened." Jake's appearance answered that question immediately. The bandage above his eye, the swollen face, and the way he favored his left arm told a story of violence. Several club members stood up, ready to ride out and settle whatever score needed settling. "I got jumped," Jake said simply. 3 guys with knives behind Murphy's truck stop." "Those punks are dead men," growled Big Mike, the club's enforcer. "Just give us names and addresses." "Already handled," Jake said, which surprised everyone. Jake wasn't known for handling problems quietly. "You took care of 3 armed men by yourself?" asked Danny, the treasurer, with a busted shoulder and cracked ribs. "I had help," Jake said, and something in his voice made the room go quiet. Bulldog studied Jake's face carefully. In 12 years of leading the club, he'd learned to read his men like books. Something had changed in Jake Morrison overnight. Something deeper than just winning a fight. "Sit down and tell us what happened," Bulldog said. Jake took his usual seat at the leadership table, but he didn't start talking right away. He looked around the room at faces he'd known for years, men who'd stood with him through fights, business deals, family problems, and everything else life had thrown at them. These were his brothers, but after spending time with David, Jake wasn't sure he understood what brotherhood really meant anymore. "3 punks cornered me behind the truck stop," Jake began. "They knew my routine, knew I'd have cash after our Tuesday meeting, had me on the ground, going through my pockets, talking about finishing me off." "And?" prompted Bulldog. "And a homeless guy with a metal pipe ran them off. Saved my life. No question about it." The room erupted in surprised voices. Several members started asking questions at once, but Bulldog held up a hand for silence. "Homeless guy saved your life?" he asked. "David Wilson? Army veteran, been on the streets about 3 months. Lives under the highway overpass with 4 other people he takes care of." "Takes care of how?" asked Danny. Jake found himself describing David's small community under the bridge, the Vietnam veteran with PTSD, the grandmother who'd lost everything, the foster kid learning construction skills, the teenage girl trying to stay in school. As he talked, Jake could see confusion on his brothers' faces. This wasn't the story about homeless people they expected to hear. "So this guy saves your ass and wants what in return?" Big Mike asked. "Money? Protection? A job?" "Nothing," Jake said. "Wouldn't take money, wouldn't take anything. Said if I wanted to pay him back, I should help someone else when I got the chance." The room fell silent. In the world of motorcycle clubs, everything had a price. Every favor came with obligations. The idea of someone risking their life for a stranger and asking for nothing in return didn't compute. "There's more," Jake continued. "This guy David, he's not just surviving on the streets. He's thriving, building a family out of people society threw away, teaching them skills, keeping them safe, giving them hope. I've never seen anything like it. Jake stood up, his excitement overriding the pain in his ribs. You should see how. These people look at him. Not because they're afraid or because he's got power over them. They love him because he genuinely cares about their lives. Thunder, where are you going with this? Bulldog asked. I'm going somewhere that's going to sound crazy, Jake admitted. But hear me out, this man saved my life. In our world, that's a debt that has to be paid. But he won't take money, won't take favors, won't take anything for himself. Jake looked around the room at his brothers, but his friends need everything. They need shelter, they need food, they need hope. And I think we need to give it to them. Big Mike laughed. You want us to adopt a bunch of homeless people? Thunder, you hit your head harder than we thought. I want us to remember what brotherhood really means, Jake said, his voice growing stronger. David Wilson showed me something last night that I'd forgotten. Real brotherhood isn't just about having people who fight for you. It's about having people who will sacrifice for you, even when you can't give them anything back. Jake, Bulldog said carefully, you're talking about a lot of money and resources for people who aren't club members. I'm talking about honor, Jake replied. For 22 years, I've been proud to wear these colors because they meant something. They meant we were different from regular people, better, more loyal, more willing to sacrifice for each other. Jake pointed toward the front of the room where the club's charter hung on the wall. But last night, a man with nothing showed me more honor and brotherhood than I've seen in years. And he did it without colors, without a club, without anything, except the belief that good people help each other. What exactly are you proposing? Asked Danny. Jake took a deep breath. I'm proposing we do something that's never been done before. I'm proposing we build David Wilson and his friends a house. Not just any house, a real home. And I'm proposing we do it in a way that shows everyone what the Steel Devils really stand for. The room exploded in voices again. Some members thought Jake had lost his mind. Others were intrigued by the idea. A few started asking practical questions about cost and logistics. Bulldog let the discussion continue for several minutes before calling for quiet. Jake, you're talking about a major undertaking. Something like this would need approval from all the chapters. We'd need to vote on it. Then let's vote, Jake said. But first, let me tell you what I learned last night about what real honor looks like. For the next hour, Jake told his brothers everything. He described David's character, his military service, the way he'd sacrificed his own shirt to help a stranger. He talked about the community David had built and how each person there had been transformed by his leadership. Most importantly, Jake helped his brothers understand that this wasn't just about helping homeless people. This was about proving that the Steel Devils were worthy of the respect they demanded from others. By the time Jake finished talking, the room had grown quiet. These were hard men who'd seen everything life could throw at them, but David's story had touched something deep inside their code of honor. So, Bulldog said finally, you want to gather 300 bikers to build a house for a homeless veteran who saved your life. I want to show the world what brotherhood really means, Jake replied. Bulldog looked around the room at his officers, reading their faces. Then he smiled. Let's make some phone calls. Within 20 minutes of Bulldog's decision, the Steel Devils clubhouse transformed into a war room. But instead of planning retaliation or territorial disputes, these hardened bikers were organizing the largest act of kindness their community had ever attempted. Jake watched in amazement as his brothers threw themselves into the project with the same intensity they brought to everything else. Phone calls started immediately, reaching out to chapters across 3 states. The story of David Wilson spread through the motorcycle network like wildfire. Our Wolves are in, reported Danny, hanging up his phone. Their president says he's got 15 members who work construction, and they'll bring tools. Road Reapers want to know if we need electrical work, added Big Mike. Turns out their treasurer is a licensed electrician with his own business. Bulldog worked the phones like a general commanding troops. Each call brought more commitments, more resources, more people who wanted to be part of something extraordinary. The motorcycle community, known for its fierce independence, was coming together. For a homeless veteran they'd never met. "We need land first," Bulldog announced to the room. "Can't build a house without somewhere to put it." "Already handled," Jake said, pulling out his phone. "I called my real estate contact an hour ago. There's a quarter-acre lot 3 blocks from downtown. Owner's been trying to sell it for 2 years. I offered him asking price cash if he can close by tomorrow morning." "You're buying land with your own money?" asked Danny. "David saved my life," Jake replied. "Least I can do is provide the ground to build his new one on." The room fell quiet for a moment as Jake's commitment sank in. This wasn't just club business anymore. This was personal for their road captain, and that made it personal for all of them. "Thunder's putting his money where his mouth is," Bulldog said approvingly. "What about permits and inspections? Can't just throw up a house without the city knowing about it." "My cousin works in the building department," offered Tony, one of the newer members. "He says if we file everything properly and use licensed contractors for the major systems, we can get emergency permits, especially for a veteran housing project." Jake looked around the room at faces he'd known for years, seeing them with new eyes. These men were revealing skills and connections he'd never known they had. The motorcycle club was more than just a group of riders. It was a network of professionals, craftsmen, and business people who could make things happen when they set their minds to it. "What about materials?" asked Bulldog. "Lumber, concrete, roofing, that's serious money." "I've got connections at 3 lumber yards," said Rick, the club's sergeant-at-arms. "Been doing business with them for 10 years through my carpentry shop. They'll give us contractor prices if I vouch for the project." "My brother-in-law runs a concrete company," added another member. "He'll donate the foundation work if we cover." Materials, the offers kept coming. Plumbing supplies, electrical components, roofing materials, windows, doors. Every call brought new commitments from businesses owned by bikers or their family members. The motorcycle community's network was vast, and tonight it was focused on a single goal, but the most surprising call came from outside the biker world entirely. Word about the project had already leaked to local media, and businesses were calling the clubhouse asking how they could help. "That was Channel 7 News," Bulldog announced after hanging up. "They want to cover the story. And get this, 3 local businesses just offered to donate appliances and furniture." Jake felt overwhelmed by the response. What had started as his personal mission to repay a debt was becoming something much bigger. The story of David Wilson wasn't just touching motorcycle clubs, it was inspiring an entire community. "We need to think about logistics," said Danny, ever the practical one. "If we're really going to have 300 people show up tomorrow, we need organization. Food, water, parking, tool coordination, safety equipment. And we need to make sure David doesn't find out," Jake added. "He'd try to stop us if he knew what was coming." Bulldog assigned tasks like a seasoned commander. Danny would coordinate with arriving chapters and manage the volunteer crews. Big Mike would handle security and crowd control. Rick would supervise the actual construction with help from professional contractors in the group. "What about David's friends under the bridge?" asked Tony. "Can't leave them homeless while we're building him a house." Jake smiled. He'd been hoping someone would ask that question. "Already thought of that. The house we're building has 4 bedrooms. David's going to need roommates, and I know exactly who should move in with him." "The whole homeless camp?" Big Mike asked. "Tommy, Betty, Carlos, and Ashley," Jake confirmed. "They're his family." "This house isn't just for David, it's for all of them," the room erupted in approving voices. These bikers understood loyalty and taking care of your own. The idea of keeping David's family together appealed to their sense of honor. As the evening wore on, the scope of the project continued to grow. What had started as plans for a simple house evolved into something spectacular. The Iron Wolves offered to landscape the yard. The Road Reapers wanted to build a workshop where David could teach construction skills to other people who needed them. "This is getting out of hand," Danny warned. "We're talking about a major construction project that needs to happen in one day." Then we make it happen in one day, Bulldog replied firmly. How many times has this club been told something was impossible? How many times have we proved people wrong? Jake felt a surge of pride in his brothers. This was the Steel Devils at their best, taking on a challenge that seemed impossible and refusing to back down. But more than that, they were doing it. For the right reasons, the phone rang again, and Tony answered. His expression grew serious as he listened, then broke into a huge grin. That was the state chapter president, he announced. Word spread all the way to the capital. He's sending every available member, plus he's reached out to clubs in neighboring states. We're not looking at 300 people anymore. How many? Bulldog asked. Conservative estimate? 500. Could be more. The room went silent as the magnitude of what they were organizing hit everyone. This wasn't just a local project anymore. It was becoming the largest coordinated effort in the history of their motorcycle community. Boys, Bulldog said quietly, I think we're about to make history. Jake thought about David under that bridge, probably helping Ashley with homework or making sure Tommy had his medication. David had no idea that his simple act of courage had set in motion something that would change not just his life, but the lives of hundreds of people across multiple states. There's one more thing, Jake said. When we do this tomorrow, we do it right. No club politics, no territory disputes, no ego battles. We work together like the brotherhood we claim to be. Agreed, said Bulldog. This is bigger than any one club. This is about proving that bikers are more than the stereotypes people believe. As the meeting broke up and members headed home to prepare for the biggest day in Steel Devils history, Jake felt a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. Tomorrow they would show the world what honor really looked like. David Wilson had saved one man's life. Tomorrow that one man and his brothers would change David's life forever. David woke up Thursday morning to the distant rumble of motorcycle engines. At first, he thought it was just the usual highway traffic, but the sound kept getting louder and closer. He checked his watch, 6:30 a.m. Tommy was still sleeping peacefully, which was unusual since he normally woke up with nightmares around dawn. You hear that? Betty asked, poking her head out from behind her cardboard shelter. Sounds like a motorcycle rally, David replied, listening to the growing thunder of engines. Must be heading to the fairgrounds for some event. Carlos emerged from his sleeping area, rubbing his eyes. That's a lot of bikes. I can feel the ground shaking. David helped Ashley pack her school books, trying not to worry about the noise. In their 3 months under the bridge, they'd learned that large groups of motorcycles usually meant trouble for homeless people. Club members sometimes came looking for fights or places to party where nobody would bother them. Maybe we should take a walk, David suggested. Get some breakfast at the diner until they pass through. But as they gathered their things, the sound of engines didn't fade away. Instead, it grew louder and seemed to be coming from multiple directions. David's military training kicked in, and he realized this wasn't a group passing through. This was a group converging on their area. Everyone stay calm, David said, though his own heart was racing. Let's just see what happens. The first motorcycle appeared around the corner at 7 a.m. sharp. Then another. Then dozens more, all heading toward the empty lot 3 blocks away that David passed every day on his way to job interviews. The lot had been for sale as long as he'd been in the neighborhood. David, Tommy said, his veteran instincts sharp. Despite his struggles, that's not random. They're organizing. Within 30 minutes, the empty lot had transformed into a staging area for the largest gathering of motorcycles any of them had ever seen. Hundreds of bikes filled the space, with more arriving every few minutes. But these weren't rowdy troublemakers. These bikers were unloading tools, lumber, and construction equipment. Are they building something? Ashley asked, standing on a milk crate to see over the barriers that had suddenly appeared around the lot. David watched in amazement as the organized chaos unfolded. Men and women in leather jackets were setting up what looked like a construction site. Concrete trucks were arriving, followed by lumber delivery vehicles and equipment trailers. This wasn't a motorcycle rally, this was a building project. We should get out of here, Betty said nervously. Whatever they're doing, we don't want to be in the way. But David couldn't move. Something about this felt familiar, like construction sites he'd supervised for 12 years. These people knew what they were doing, and they were working with military precision. Someone was organizing this operation like a major project. That's when David saw him. Jake Morrison, the biker he'd helped 2 nights ago, standing in the middle of the organized chaos and pointing in their direction. David's stomach dropped as he realized Jake was leading a group of people toward their bridge. "David!" Jake called out as he approached with a dozen other bikers behind him. "We need to talk." David stepped forward, putting himself between Jake's group and his friends. "Jake, if this is about the other night, I told you I don't want anything." "I know what you told me," Jake said with a grin that David couldn't interpret. "But we've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" Jake gestured toward the construction site that had appeared overnight. "See all that? All those people? All that equipment? Well, it turns out we need the guest of honor, and he's missing." "Guest of honor for what?" "For the house we're building. Your house, David, for you and your family here." David stared at Jake like he'd spoken a foreign language. "My what?" "Your house," Jake repeated. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, full kitchen, living room, workshop in the garage. Should be finished by sunset if everyone does their job right. The words didn't make sense. David looked from Jake to the construction site to his friends, trying to process what he was hearing. "Jake, I don't understand." "You can't just build someone a house in one day. Want to bet?" Jake laughed. "Come on, you need to see this." Against his better judgment, David found himself walking toward the construction site with his friends close behind. What he saw when they got closer took his breath away. Over 500 people were working in perfect coordination. Foundation crews were pouring concrete while framing teams assembled walls in sections. Electrical and plumbing crews worked alongside each other, running lines and installing systems. A roofing team stood ready with materials already staged, but these weren't just any construction workers. These were motorcycle club members from across 3 states, many of whom owned their own businesses or worked in skilled trades. The patches on their jackets told the story Iron Wolves, Road Reapers, Steel Devils, Thunder Riders, and dozens of other clubs David had never heard of. "How is this possible?" David asked, still not believing what he was seeing. "Turns out the motorcycle community has a lot more carpenters, electricians, plumbers, and contractors than people realize," Jake explained. "And turns out your story got around pretty fast." "My story?" "The story of an Army veteran who saved a stranger's life and asked for nothing in return. The story of a man who built a family out of people society threw away. The story of someone who proved that honor isn't about what you have, it's about what you're willing to give." David felt tears welling up in his eyes as he watched the organized miracle unfolding before him. "Jake, this is too much. I can't accept this." "You're not accepting anything," Jake said firmly. "You're receiving payment for a debt. In our world, when someone saves your life, that debt gets paid, no exceptions." "But I have nothing to give you in return." "You already gave us everything," Jake replied. "You showed us what real brotherhood looks like. You reminded us why we wear these colors and what they're supposed to mean." Bulldog, the Steel Devils president, approached with a clipboard and a huge smile. "You must be David. I'm Ray Patterson, but everyone calls me Bulldog. Jake here tells me you're quite a man." David shook hands with the club president, still overwhelmed by everything happening around him. "Mr. Patterson, this is incredible, but I don't know how to repay." "Stop right there," Bulldog interrupted. "This isn't about repayment. This is about respect. Respect for a man who showed true courage and honor when it mattered most." As the day progressed, David and his friends were given front row seats to witness something unprecedented. The house took shape with breathtaking speed. By noon, the frame was complete and the roof was going on. By 3 p.m., siding and windows were being installed while interior crews worked on flooring and fixtures. Local news crews arrived and captured the extraordinary scene. Businesses that heard about the project sent food trucks to feed the workers. Children from the neighborhood gathered to watch history being made in their community. "David," Ashley said, tugging on his sleeve, "is this really going to be our house?" David knelt down to her level, his voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think it is. All of us. Even me, especially you. We're family, remember? Families stick together." As the sun began to set, the impossible became reality. A complete house stood where an empty lot had been that morning. 4 bedrooms, just as Jake had promised, with furniture donated by local businesses, a full kitchen stocked with food, a workshop where David could teach construction skills to others who needed them. But the most incredible moment came when Jake led David to the front of the house where over 500 bikers had assembled with their motorcycles. The sound of engines starting filled the air, creating a thunderous tribute that could be heard for miles. "David Wilson," Jake announced over the roar, "the Steel Devils and our brother clubs present you with your new home. May it shelter you and your family for many years to come." As Jake handed David the keys, both men had tears in their eyes. What had started with a simple act of courage had become something neither could have imagined, a demonstration of human kindness that would be remembered for generations. David looked at his friends, Tommy, Betty, Carlos, and Ashley, all crying and laughing at the same time. Then he looked at the hundreds of bikers who had given up their day to change his life. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice carrying over the rumbling engines. "Thank you for showing me that miracles still happen when good people come together." That night, for the first time in months, David Wilson and his family slept in real beds, in a real house, surrounded by the love of a community that had embraced them completely. And Jake Morrison went to sleep knowing that sometimes the best investment you can make is in the kindness of strangers. The homeless man who had saved a biker's life had found his home. And in the process, he had reminded an entire community what it really means to take care of each other.